If you have ever traveled internationally, it's likely you had a passport to aid in your comings and goings and to serve as a record of your entry and exit from one country to another. While a passport may seem commonplace today, that wasn't always the case. So how do passports connect to the history of the BSA? We'll answer that question and more in this edition of Artifact of the Week. The history of the passport dates to biblical times in the book of Nehemiah. At the beginning of chapter 2, Nehemiah is serving as a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. After he learns that the walls of Jerusalem have been destroyed, he asks the king for letters to the governors of the provinces to grant him safe passage through the lands beyond the Euphrates River to Judah, so that he may rebuild the walls and the gates of the city of Jerusalem. The king grants his requests, and what we might consider the first passport is issued. As early as 206 BC in the Han Dynasty of China, they controlled movement across imperial territories with a document that included identifiers such as age, height, and other visible physical features. These travel documents would have to be presented at control points throughout the country. In the medieval Muslim world, the Islamic Caliphate issued a bara'ah to tax-paying citizens as a form of receipt of taxes paid. Citizens would be required to show this document at checkpoints along their travels, and without it, people could not travel between different regions. Medieval Europeans also had what they called sauf-conduit, or safe conduct passes that served as a written request from one ruler to another that recognized each other's authority and were intended to grant an enemy the freedom to pass in and out of a territory as they negotiated terms to maintain or reestablish peaceful relationships. Many of these documents listed the specific towns and cities the document bearer could pass through. Without these agreements, merely stepping over a border could lead to an armed conflict. One of the oldest surviving safe conduct documents in Britain dates back to an Act of Parliament in 1414 during the reign of Henry V. Back in those days, the monarch could issue documents like this to anyone, even a foreigner, allowing them to freely travel throughout the kingdom. Interestingly, English subjects had to pay for this kind of document, while a foreign national would not be charged. By the mid-1500s, the term passport was being used routinely. While there's much disagreement on whether the term refers to legal entry to a country through a seaport or legal passage through the gates of a city or country, there is agreement that the passport allowed for people to prove they were permitted to be where they were found. This was particularly important for merchants trying to sell their wares in countries with varied restrictions on commercial transactions. In 1789, the U.S. State Department began issuing passports to American citizens traveling abroad. However, it wasn't until 1856 that Congress granted the federal government sole authority to issue passports, prohibiting other governmental entities such as state and judicial authorities from issuing passports to American citizens. From the 1500s to the mid-1800s, the passport and its use to grant regulated access to foreign lands remained relatively unchanged. But then in the mid-1800s, as the Industrial Revolution was fueling migration, with people traveling from one country to another looking for better opportunities, the passport was seen by governments as a way to control this overwhelming influx of people and provide security and identification within their borders. Unfortunately, keeping up with the vast number of people became nearly impossible, and the use of passports to control borders was temporarily dissolved. For Americans, the earliest passport applications were generally handwritten letters, but by the 1860s, most were submitted on printed forms. Now, unexpectedly, travel abroad by American citizens in the 19th century was much more common than you might think. Between 1810 and 1909, the State Department issued over 500,000 passports to businessmen, vacationers, and naturalized U.S. citizens returning to their homelands to visit relatives. These numbers do not account for any additional American citizens that traveled abroad without a passport or with passports issued by state or judicial authorities. 95% of these passports were issued to men, and men traveling with their wives, children, servants, or other females they were responsible for in their party were listed on a single application in the man's name and traveled as a group under a single passport issued to him. For women traveling alone with children, the children were listed on her application and traveled with her passport in a similar manner. The State Department issued regular passports without charge until July 1, 1862, when a $3 application fee was instituted. Following the First World War, the League of Nations championed the idea of a worldwide passport standard as a way to ensure that all countries would have passports and that passports could be used as a way of identifying legal citizenship status and protections to the bearer of said passport. Using this new international standard, the U.S. Congress passed the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and later the Immigration Act of 1924, both limiting the inflow of immigrants to the United States. Early U.S. passports were valid for 2 years or less and contained descriptive information about the person the passport was issued to, including date of birth, place of birth, physical descriptions, which may include the applicant's age, height, a description of the forehead, maybe broad or medium, their eye color, blue, gray, hazel, whatever it was, shape of the nose, straight, crooked, their mouth, was it medium, thin, maybe mustached, chin, was it round or pointed, or did they have a beard? Hair color, dark, black, gray, complexion, healthy, fair, and face, was it round, oval, long? Occupations were sometimes included, and many applications also contained details on their destinations and the reason for the trip. If the applicant was a naturalized citizen, then the court and date of their naturalization, as well as the date and name of the ship they arrived on, were also included in many occasions. As photography became more common, photos replaced the physical description section and became a required part of the passport application in 1914. Over the years, passports evolved from handwritten documents to small booklets with personal information printed in them and spaces for visa stamps included. Most passports also came with some sort of statement intended to provide a purpose for the passport and, as in the days of old, safe passage letters asking for the safe passage and legal protection of the bearer. So why all this talk of passports? Recently we came across an unsolicited donation containing some very special artifacts, including this 1920 passport issued to a scout from Denver, Colorado. This version of the U.S. passport is very similar to British passports of the same time frame. It's a sheet of paper folded in eighths and secured within a cardboard cover. The scout attended the First World Jamboree in 1920 in England, and the passport has many of the features we've been talking about. For example, on the back of the inside cover is a statement saying, "The document herewith enclosed is an American passport." This statement is repeated in several languages. On the inside front cover is the signature and address of the bearer, as well as their foreign address, which in this case says "with BSA delegation." The first item we see on the actual passport part of the document is a visa stamp from the French consulate in New York City, dated July 5th, 1920. Allowing this scout to enter France. When you open the passport document, you see the official header, the scout's name, his destinations, the British Isles, France, and Belgium, and the object of his visit, Boy Scout meet. You can also see the space where others traveling on this particular passport would have been listed. In this case, these have lines drawn through them to indicate they are empty and not overlooked. In the lower left-hand corner, you will find the personal description section with age, 14, height, 5 foot 1 inch, forehead medium, eyes brown, nose broad, mouth medium, chin round, hair brown, complexion medium, and face round. His place and date of birth are also included, November 3rd, 1905 in Denver, Colorado. His occupation and distinguishing marks have both been crossed out, again indicating no entry. This passport also has a photo, and our scout is in his uniform. On the collar of the jacket is a pin with the initials ISB. Now this is a military uniform, not an official scout uniform, as we can see by the epaulets on the shoulders. One of the more interesting parts of the boilerplate of this document is the certification section, which says, "Given under my hand and the seal of the Department of State at the City of Washington, on the first day of July in the year 1920, and of the independence of the United States, the 144th. Signed, Bainbridge Colby." On the inside, it has a visa stamp from the British Passport Control Office in New York City, allowing entrance into England, and a second stamp showing that he arrived in Southampton on July 16th. The other item on the inside of the passport is a statement concerning how long the passport is valid. As you can see, a handwritten correction has been entered and extended this passport from 6 months to 12 months with an expiration of July 1st, 1921. In addition to the passport, we also received his 1920 BSA Contingent Medal, which was given to each scout attending the Jamboree as part of the BSA contingent. His War Bond Sales Medal, and his War Bond Savings Ace Service Medal with 5 bronze and 2 silver palms, indicating that he sold at least $2,750 in war bonds. And finally, a French-issued World War I medal, which in all likelihood was presented to his father as an Allied soldier serving with valor in France during the First World War. Now, as a general rule, U.S. citizens were not required to have a passport for international travel until June 21, 1941, when Congress passed a law that required them. There have been a couple of other notable exceptions to the requirement of carrying a passport abroad, such as during the Civil War, from August 1861 to March of 1862. Then in December 1915, President Woodrow Wilson signed an executive order which stated that all persons leaving the U.S. should have a U.S. passport while traveling abroad. And U.S. citizens were required to carry a passport while traveling from May 22, 1918 until the formal termination of World War I in 1921. Now today, more than 130 countries have microchips and/or biometric passports, and at least 2 countries have passports up for sale to the highest bidder. In both of these small nations, you can make a significant investment or simply pay an annual fee, and in return, you will receive a passport from their country. Now this is particularly popular as an option for the ultra-wealthy, allowing them to keep their travel options flexible. One of the least accepted passports in the world is the Israeli passport. Currently, it's not accepted in 23 Muslim countries, North Korea, or Cuba. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of the BSA through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.